Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Karen Saupe. We hear about prisoners, but not so often from prisoners. When best-selling author Wally Lamb tried his hand at teaching inmates to write, he had no idea how many lives would be affected as those voices empowered authors and readers alike. Hear about it today on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Wally Lamb, a best-selling novelist who volunteered to develop a writing program for prisoners in Connecticut. After considerable opposition from the prison, he collected some of the best essays into two books titled Couldn't Keep It to Myself and I'll Fly Away. Welcome, Wally.
Thank you, Karen. Good to be with you.
When you first visited the prison, tell me how that came about. You were a well-known writer at that time and had appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show a few times.
Right.
And then you got a phone call.
Yeah, I was just leaving a teaching position at the University of Connecticut. My books were all packed in boxes and out in the hallway, and I had the office key in my hand. I was about to return it to the secretary, and the phone rang, and it was a woman that I had grown up with as a kid, and she had become the librarian at the York Correctional Institution, and she said, "Wally, we're in trouble here. We've had a couple of suicides, 3 more of the women have attempted suicide," and there was this kind of despair that had begun to infect the entire prison. And she said, we're sort of connecting with anybody we know in the community to see if they'll come down and talk about their work to distract the women. Well, I didn't particularly want to go, but I have in that office that I maintained, I have an index card. I have a hard time saying no to people, so I have this index card with a little script on it that sort of gets me out of things. But of course, the office was packed up, and so the index card was thrown in the trash. So I said, I hemmed and hawed and said, okay, I'll go. And I remember that first trip. I was driving down the highway, and I stopped. I pulled over to the median and I stopped, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there's this big highway sign that says, "Correctional Facility Area, do not stop." So, but anyway, I kept going, and I was sort of, the stereotypes that I had managed to collect along the way were dispelled almost immediately when I walked into the prison. It's intimidating. You have to go through a series of 10 doors, and they sort of lock and slide behind you. But once I was with the women and we sat down and began to work, it was like any other classroom that I had superintended.
But the first questions you got from these women
yeah.
were not about writing so much.
Right. Well, it was a voluntary program, and so I think we had about 35 or 40 women who had signed up to see that dude who had been on Oprah.
Right.
And so I went and I talked about my writing, and we did several exercises. And then I asked them toward the end of the class, I said, does anybody have any questions about writing? And one hand went up, you met Oprah? I said, yes, I did. And we talked a little bit about that. And then the next question about writing was, what's Oprah like? And that kind of thing. So anyway, there was a woman, sort of a, kind of like the fiercest looking woman in the group. Her nickname was Manhattan. And she had been scowling at me for the entire 90 minutes. And so I was very surprised when she threw me a curveball. She raised her hand and said, "Thank you for coming." And I said, "You're welcome." And she said, "Are you coming back?" Well, again, no index card. So, so I said, well, okay, I'll come back in 2 weeks. Whoever's interested in coming back with me, write something, 2 pages, I don't care what, and that'll be your ticket back into the workshop. So
it's really Manhattan who hired you.
Yeah, right, pretty much. And I was too intimidated not to, not to accept.
And that was
the second time I went back. We were down by about half because the Oprah interested people had taken
gotten
off.
what they needed.
But the people who had written, their first drafts were as bad as my first drafts are, and yet there was something, there was real meaning in their work, and there was an effort. One woman named Diane Bartholomew, who had come up to me at the beginning of the class and said, "You're not going to read anything out loud that I write, are you?" And I said, "Oh, no, that would be, your decision, not mine." But at the end of that class, she raised her hand, and I remember her hand was shaking, and she said, "Can I read what I wrote?" And I said yes, and then she read 2 or 3 pages of, it was very disjointed, it was kind of like a 3-page summary of her entire life, and what a sad life it had been. She had been incested by a father, and she had married an abusive man, and then she had snapped and killed him and ended up in prison. But she, her reading her piece it really broke through the dam of distrust, and then everybody began to trust everybody else.
Because they don't initially, I mean, even in a, I was going to say normal classroom. You and I both taught high school. You and I both taught in a college classroom. How is this situation different for the students and for the atmosphere?
Well, for one thing, they're grateful that you show up, and their gratitude is played out in the way that they work. When the women, many of them start out with safe pieces, the time that my family went to Disney World, or, when my grandfather was sick and died, that kind of stuff. And then little by little, as they begin to trust themselves and feel safe within the classroom, they get to the tough stuff. And you can see it almost in terms of the body language. When if they've been sexually abused, or something terrible happened to them when they were 5, that kind of thing, they sort of hover around it subject-wise, and then they get into it. And then I've seen this over and over where once they start, they can't stop, because all that guilt and shame that they've been carrying inside of them, and this sort of almost doubled them over, begins to come out on the page, and it sort of lightens their load a little bit. And then when they take that next really big step and say, okay, now I'm going to share it with the rest of you. Some of the women feel very comfortable in reading their stuff aloud. Others can't, and so they hand it to me, or a trusted friend, and that person reads it. And then we react to it. And then we're all carrying that secret, and it's no longer a secret, and it really transforms many of the women. I've seen some, I don't use the word miraculous too often, but I've seen some miraculous changes in women from the writing.
Why do you think it happens with writing, maybe more than in just conversation? Why aren't they already talking about these stories with each other in the cells?
When you write down those memories, whether they're happy ones or not so happy, you have to relive the experience. And then, I'm a fiction writer, so I teach them how to use fictional techniques such as dialogue, and they'll say, well, I can't remember exactly the words of the conversation that happened 10 years ago. And I say, of course you can't, but you can sort of recreate it as truthfully, as you remember. And so little by little, their writing gets better. They revise relentlessly, and the women around them become such good critics. The best classes that I can witness and guide are the ones where I sit in the back and I don't say too much, and they teach one another.
Now, when people are writing about such personal experiences, though, I found with my own students, it's raw and it's difficult for them, and so for them to change anything, for them to edit seems very painful, and for others to critique them or suggest any changes almost seems inappropriate, and yet to make good writing you have to do that. How do you get over that hill? Well,
with the women that I work with, they want very much to get it right, and so I have rules in the workshop. The writer can't speak. She has a sort of a virtual gag on while the other people are discussing her work. And then she gets to talk at the end or ask questions, that kind of thing. I also always like to start the conversation with, okay, what's working in this piece? Where were you most with it? Where were you emotionally involved, and so forth? So rather than talk about, we never say, here's what's bad about a piece, but here's what works and here's what still needs work. And I try to sort of debunk what revision is and demystify it. So really, revision is some combination of 4 strategies. What can I add to make it better? What can I delete that's going to make it stronger? What do I need to clarify? And what can I reposition for better effect? Clarification is ever important. Like when I know this with my own writing, sometimes I think I'm being crystal clear, but I also work in writers groups, and so I'll bring my stuff to the group, and then you know that you have work to do.
How do they think about audience?
Well,
is it the other women in the room? Are they imagining now, particularly since there are a couple published collections of essays, are they imagining now a publishing audience?
Well, they always have the choice of who they want their audience to be, whether it's just our safe little group, but what happens is that when they work so hard at it and they dispel those secrets that they've kept, they become less focused on keeping them secret. And but it changed the equation when suddenly, after about, I think it was about the 5th year, when a lot of the writing had gotten so strong that it became publishable. And then all of a sudden, some of them were hesitant to sort of bring their work beyond the prison walls. Some of them were protective of their parents and grandparents. Some of them were afraid, if I shot and killed my abusive husband, and then I publish this, what are his relatives gonna think? The women are writing with an honesty, so that they're not making excuses for what they've done. They're just trying to figure out, the chain of things that made that happen. Most of the women become proud of the work that they've done and want to share it with the world. Now, I went there originally just so they could have that catharsis if they chose to have it. But then, I'm out in the community and people are saying things to me like, oh, gee, I wish I could, commit a felony so that I could go down and join the fun.
Right.
Those kinds of attitudes. And I began to think, gee, these writings by these very sincere women could maybe help to dispel some of the stereotypes that people have and some of the really negative ways and simplistic ways of thinking about us versus them and good people versus bad people. So publishing their work, for me, sort of took on a second kind of mission.
So that we can hear the voices of the prisoners rather than assuming we know how they got there.
Right.
What are some of the stories that have surprised or moved you most?
One of the women that I've worked with for many years, her name is Barbara Parsons, and when she entered the group, she was hangdog. She was one of the women who had killed her abusive husband, and then when she was in prison, her son had died in a car accident, and she was allowed to leave prison to go to his wake to see his body. But she was in belly chains and handcuffs and leg chains, and the wake was cleared out. Nobody could see her or talk to her, and she was there for about 10 minutes. And suddenly the corrections officers who had escorted her said, "Okay, the traffic on I-95 is going to be pretty bad, so that's it." And so by the time she walked into our workshop, she was pretty badly beaten up and had such terrible guilt about the things that had happened and sadness. And so she would write, and And she was one of the people that could never read her own writing. So she'd trust me, and I'd read it for her. And she'd sit there with a, well, we don't have a box of Kleenex. We have this big giant roll of toilet paper, and it sort of passes around the circle.
Yeah.
But anyway, she'd sit there with the toilet paper roll and cry, as she listened to her work. One day, I said to her, "Boy, you must cry a river when you're writing these memories down." And she said, "I don't." She said, "I write them dry-eyed, and it's only when I hear them that it all comes back to me."
Interesting.
But what happened over the months and then over the years with Barbara is that she sort of came into herself. She's a very shy and self-effacing woman, and yet she became a sort of champion of, she wanted to educate people about how not to fall into the traps of domestic violence. One of the things she felt most guilty about was that she stayed, with this husband until, she had done this terrible thing, and then the ripple effect, that affected all of her kids and so forth. But she became more self-confident. She really transformed in a dramatic way, and I'm happy to say that she's now out of prison. And is doing wonderful work. She speaks at colleges and fundraisers and so forth. She has taken that, that education she received and is trying to pass it on.
That's neat. Getting some of these great essays to publication was looking good for a while, and then at the last minute, the prison administration intervened. Tell me that story.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well. I think it was about by the 5th year. I was, I didn't really have any definite plans to publish their work, and I thought I was going to self-publish their work and give them copies, and they could send home to their families, and maybe a stack of copies for the prison library, that kind of thing. But I happened to be going down to New York on book business, traveling on the train from Connecticut, where I live. And so I was going through their papers and making notations on the sides of the margins and that kind of thing. And when I got to New York, my editor, said, "Oh, what's new?" And I said, "Oh, this is happening, and I'm really excited about this volunteering that I'm doing at the prison." And she said, just to be polite, I think, she said, "Oh, well, maybe you should show me their work sometime." And I said, "Well, as a matter of fact," and I took one out, and she's a tough New York editor, and doesn't cry at all. But when I finished reading a piece by one of our students, Nancy Whiteley, I looked up, and she was crying. And she said, "This is better than half the stuff that by the professionals that I see."
It's really extraordinarily good writing.
Yeah. When Judith Regan, the editor, decided that she was interested in publishing their stories, I went to the Department of Correction in Connecticut, and I said, "This opportunity has come up. What do you think? I will show you all the writing. If there are security things that you want me to, edit out, I'm fine with that. And just, let me know what you need and what you want." So they were well aware of this project. And for the next year and a half, we were working on it, and I was editing the pieces. And when I finished the manuscript, I went down to the warden and I handed it to her, and I said, "Let me know." And there was no response. It was complete silence. Well, in my naivete, I thought that silence meant consent. Meanwhile, HarperCollins had drawn up a book contract for each of the women, and we gave a copy of that to the Department of Correction, and there was no response there. The lawyers from HarperCollins called, and they didn't receive any answers from the department. So we just thought that they were going to kind of distance themselves. And then we found out, I think it was 2 or 3 days before the publication date, one of the women who had done her time and gotten free, she called up in tears and she said, "The sheriff just came to my door." She said, "I thought I was being pulled back to prison, but I found out that I'm being sued because I participated in the writing." Well, the lawsuit said that the women who would, from the book sale, would have each gotten about $6,000 that would be, not to spend in prison, but when it would be waiting for them to sort of restart their lives when they got out. You would think that if anything, that the state of Connecticut would have sued them
For that amount.
For that amount. But what they had done instead was they were suing them. They decided to bill them on a daily basis for their incarceration.
For the entire cost of the incarceration.
Right. So they charged them $117 a day for every day of their sentence. And so now these women who thought they had done a good thing, and you know, they had some of their earnings they had dedicated to a battered women's shelter, and you know, they were feeling good about themselves. And suddenly they owed the state, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
My goodness.
So as you can imagine, it demoralized the women and
you
and me, yeah, definitely, yeah, and then you know the Department of Correction started creating fictions about me too, and saying, oh, we didn't know anything about this. You know, he snuck this project through, meaning me. And you know, I'd pick up the newspaper and I would read this stuff and I'd think, gee, I thought I was the fiction writer. You know?
Right.
But anyway, the lawsuit languished for about a year and a half, and then I got a call from the PEN American Center, which you know, looks out for the rights of writers to their freedom of speech. And they said, gee, you know, we've read about this controversy. Why don't you nominate one of the writers for our First Amendment Award, which carried with it a $25,000 prize from Paul Newman's company, Newman's Own. And it's for somebody whose freedom of speech is under attack. Well, I was told I couldn't nominate them as a group, so I nominated Barbara Parsons, who really was the hardest worker and one of the leaders in the group, and she won the award. Well, you know, that's when...
Then she's in trouble.
Well, she's in trouble, and then I'm, you know, and they're very angry at me for having nominated her. So they told me I was no longer welcome at the prison, and they confiscated the women's floppy disks, and then the unkindest cut of all, you know, these women had worked so hard, and the principal of the then principal of the school ordered that all of the work on the hard drive in the group should be deleted.
So everything they had written was erased.
Wiped out. Yeah. So I notified the PEN American Center, and PEN notified 60 Minutes, the CBS news program, and 60 Minutes checked back with the Department of Correction, and that's where DOC made their bad move. They lied to 60 Minutes and said, oh no, none of this is happening.
Oh my.
You know, he's making it up, meaning me. And but you know, we had the proof that it happened. There was a memo that had gone out. And so once 60 Minutes decided to do the story, suddenly the state sort of did a backflip, and this was a wonderful program, we have to reinstate it, and you know, it's so great that, you know, this rehabilitation is happening and so forth. So the lawsuit was settled. And then, ironically, as Barbara Parsons was being freed and leaving prison, the governor of Connecticut, the then governor of Connecticut, was entering prison on a corruption charge. So the ironies were they were.
As I'm trying to keep score of the balance of justice and the balance of powers here, it does seem to even out in the end.
And I'm happy to say too that a wonderful thing happened as a result of all this grief and hard stuff, and that's that the state of Connecticut passed a law, the legislature passed a law so that it is now illegal for the state to sue its inmates, the people in its custody, for income that has been generated from their rehabilitative work.
Interesting.
So now the women, you know, they may keep the money that they earn from writing.
Do you think that the experience of reading can be as powerful as the experience of writing these stories?
I do think that reading can change attitudes, and attitudes can change action. Mm-hmm. One of our students, Brenda Medina, gets letters from junior high school teachers around the country who write to say, you know, I used your piece with my students, and you know, we had a great discussion about, you know, how people can become vulnerable to, you know, the sort of gang propaganda and so forth. I've gotten letters from judges who say, you know, your book made me stop and think, and you know, I think we should have more mercy in the, you know, particularly in the sentencing of people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How has all this changed you as a writer and as a person?
Well, you know, I never meant to become a writer in the first place. You know, I was a high school teacher, and I don't know, I just started writing fiction one summer, and I liked doing it, so I kept going. So in a way, I think of myself as an accidental writer, and then I also think of myself as an accidental activist, because, you know, prison rights, that was never really on my radar. But when you go through all those doors, and you see, say, 60 to 70% of the incarcerated population is people of color, you begin to hear the stories. You know, the majority of women who are incarcerated are incest victims, and so, you know, and then later they become drug addicts and or snap.
Anything they can to escape the pain.
Right, exactly. And so once you hear it and once you see it, you can't then unhear it and you can't then unsee it. And so you have to either quit and go on
and
to
escape
other
yourself.
things. Yeah. Or else you have to try to do something about it. So that's how it's changed me. You know, one of my favorite novels is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And I love it when Atticus says to his little girl to scout, you know, don't judge people until you slip their shoes on and walk around a little bit in their shoes, and you see life a little differently from a perspective that's not your own. And for me, that's the big reward.
That's what all this has been about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wally.
My pleasure.
My guest today has been best-selling novelist Wally Lamb, who has collected essays from prisoners into the books Couldn't Keep It to Myself and I'll Fly Away. I'm Karen Saupe. Thank you for watching Inner Compass.